that, perfect price discrimination could solve the problem, right? And Jim, what might be the problems with discrimination in this sort of a market? What problems might that cause?
I mean, just using the word discrimination is going to make Congress angry.
Yeah, but forget about that. But what might be real economic problems with discrimination?
It would be costly to assess on a person-by-person basis what exactly their plan should be, basically.
Yeah. What other economic problems might come from discriminating against people? What sort of things do insurance companies discriminate based on?
Or pre-existing conditions.
Yeah. And what might be bad from a society's perspective about them doing that?
You mean if they were to charge extremely high prices for someone who has
Yeah.
some kind of cancer?
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts?
Society could offer it at a lower price than.
Well, imagine.
So isn't that person really in need of insurance, and he's taking care of himself, but he can't pay that much cost because of the situation?
You're getting really close, Chrissy. Do you have a thought?
I mean, I think that our society already built some preference for insuring against certain things. That's why we have disability insurance.
Yeah.
And, you would think they would go ahead and add coverage for other conditions that you absolutely can't help, like your genetics
Exactly.
are causing. And if society already built a preference for that, then you
Yeah.
introduce price discrimination, and society definitely works off.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exactly right. So if you think about it, you don't just want insurance today for things that happen from now on. You wish you had insurance your whole life long, because once you already have a pre-existing condition, a lot of the insurance problem is already gone, right? We want to insure people against getting into the situation of having a pre-existing condition without having coverage, right? We want to give people long-term insurance. And if we start allowing people to discriminate against people based on pre-existing conditions, we've already lost most of the battle, right? Yeah, go ahead, James.
So my understanding is in the American healthcare system, you have a situation where children are covered by their parents' insurance up to a certain point, and then it kind of switches off. And it's at this point that there's going to be this dangerous situation where they might have some pre-existing condition from that they acquired before they were 23,
Yeah.
or whatever, and that they can't get a new policy.
Yeah.
So if there was a way of ensuring of it being a case that, but I assume that it is the case if I have insurance with a company,
Yeah.
and I get a condition, they can't stop renewing my insurance as a result of me getting this condition.
Well, that's all up for grabs in different legislation. So Obamacare made it so that they couldn't do that, but that's not true prior to Obamacare.
I see. Because I was just
In France it's not the case, and in many other countries it's not the case, but in the US you could.
Oh, yeah, I was just thinking about.
Because it was insurance was basically annual previously.
Right, okay.
Or employer linked. But if you lost your job and then they could drop you. Yeah, what if you lost your job because of cancer, and then you're just totally screwed. Yeah. So all of these issues come up in other selection contexts, not just here. So there's lots of other contexts where there can be issues of selection. So for example, think about markets for murky assets. So imagine, a company has, some assets to sell, and it knows a lot better than other people do what their value are. That could be a really big problem, right? Because now the market could well break down because people know that the ones that they want to sell are the bad ones. And in fact, you'll see when we watch the movie a week from Monday, that sort of in action. Another example is markets for consumer lending. There you might well have advantageous selection because the people who maybe most want to get a mortgage are the people who think it's most likely they'll be able to keep the house, right? The wealthiest people are going to be the first people into that market. And that might be a reason why there's excessive lending, right? Because everyone's trying to get those good credits. If you can't perfectly observe people's credit, there could be excessive lending, and that could have been one reason why there was too much lending during the crisis, because there was so much competition. And remember, when there's a lot of competition, you tend to get in, with advantageous selection, too much provision, right? Labor markets for skilled workers are another example of this, right? If the people who most want a job are also the people who are the best workers, because maybe they expect to progress in their career and whatever, then people are going to go excessively after those people, and there will be too many jobs offered, right? Because everyone's going to be trying to get those good people, right? So, well, while the issues that we've talked about so far are sort of very important issues in these selection markets, and particularly in insurance markets, there's some other issues that I think are really important in insurance as well that we should keep in mind. So one issue is what's called irrational brand loyalties. So like consumers can care about the name of an insurer or how well known they are for no good reason, especially given that insurance products are really just, I pay you this in these circumstances. And yet people don't just look at the contract terms, they often look at the name of the insurer. And in fact, insurers spend a huge amount of money to basically get like the AARP to endorse them. They pay the AARP a bunch of money, the AARP endorses them, the AARP gets money, and then people pay higher rates for the exact identical insurance. Yeah, go ahead, Mohan.
It's something identical, like the way they try to create the image for themselves is like, it's much easier to deal with us, and it's much easier to
maybe.
report, and we like give the claims easily.
Yeah, that's one potential dimension. But the question is, how much is irrational? What?
Like for very cheap insurances, like you have to wait for long times, for example. So
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some of that, but you might also think some of it is not so rational as that. There's the short run versus long run insurance issues we were talking about, the failure to insure the long run, and if you switch insurers, that can be bad for your what's called reclassification risk, which we were talking about before. But another reason is that if you have an insurer who's only really short run with you, right, and who doesn't expect to have you for very long, they might not have an incentive to cover preventative care, because they don't have to pay for the fact that you get really, really sick later. Whereas if you have a long run insurer, then they'll take into account the fact that you might get sick later. There's also issues about lack of competition in insurance. But maybe one reason that there's a lack of competition is because of some of these selection issues. So that's always a trade-off, right? Okay. So let me just finish up by applying this to think about the issues surrounding Obamacare. So selection gives us, I think, a language for understanding the U.S. healthcare debate. And in fact, a lot of what's come into the U.S. healthcare debate was driven by this language for selection that's been developed by economists. So Obamacare basically had two components. The first one was they said you can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. And the second was that everyone was required to buy insurance. And the logic of the selection/death spiral thing justifies these things together. So for example, imagine that we had non-discrimination without having a mandate. Chrissy, what would be the problem that we'd run into? If you weren't allowed to discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, but you didn't have any mandate, what would be the problem that?
Then you would only have high-risk people buying.
Yeah, and that could cause the whole market to collapse, right? And how about if we had the mandate to buy without having non-discrimination? What would be the problem then? Well, in particular, there'd be some people who would be so expensive for them to buy care, and now you're forcing them to buy care. They couldn't possibly afford that, right? Exactly. And so that wouldn't really work either, right? So then the question is, what is the social benefit, or what's the case for putting in this pair of policies together? Mohammed.
So we're interested in non-discrimination, and that the only way to implement that is putting it together with the mandate.
And we want non-discrimination, why?
Because those are people that are like, so that for long-term insurance.
Yeah, exactly. And what are the arguments against the policy, Eric?
I mean, there's the obvious issue that like if basically like a minor form of the issues mentioned.
Yeah.
Each of these individuals, like if you mandate non-discrimination, then it's possible that the insurers will like unable to be profitable because they have to raise the prices for everybody.
Yeah.
And
But that's just a transfer, right? So the question is, what's the social loss associated with? Dan, do you want to try?
It's kind of like that argument that we said that because there's administrative costs,
Yeah.
even if people are all risk averse, it may not be worth it for everyone to have insurance.
Yeah.
And there's also moral hazard
Yeah.
problems created from this insurance.
Yeah, exactly. So excessive insurance may reduce self-care, and a universal system may cover too many frivolous things, and that might be wasteful, right? Yeah, go ahead, James.
So, is it STEM class?
Yeah.
Do you have much to say on why the American system is so much more expensive than the other systems? And is there like any good research saying that this much is due to extra doctor the doctors?
Chad Severson just presented about that yesterday. I don't know if anyone went to it. Oh, he's presented about that today. Did anyone go to his talk? Yeah, Jim, what did he say?
It wasn't really about why we're more expensive.
Oh, really?
It was about productivity.
I see.
Dispersion among hospitals.
I see.
But I don't think he would have had much to answer that because he was expecting Amy Finkelstein to be there and she wasn't.
I see. Well, I think preventative care is one problem. I think a second big problem is stuff about end-of-life care. So for a variety of reasons in the US, we have this like really crazy culture around like what goes on at the end of life, and we keep a lot of people alive in like huge amount of suffering for a very short period at the end of their life at extremely high cost.
Is that unique to the U.S.?
It's particularly severe in the US. I think that's not most of the problem, but I think there's like 20 to 30% of the problem that comes from additional very end-of-life care. I mean, there's other issues which just are Americans have lifestyle choices that are costly along these dimensions that cause long-term, detrimental conditions that are very expensive to treat. I think that there's the doctor thing is worse in the United States, the undersupply of doctors. So I mean, there's many factors, each of which have some.
Issues.
I don't believe that. I mean, that's. I mean, all those things are sort of just transfers.
Price
But.
of, and prescriptions are different. Like there was a study that between
Oh, that's a
Canada and
huge
US,
thing. Yeah, but that's because the U.S. basically volunteered to just pay all of the expenses of drug companies for innovating, and other countries refused to pay them, and so we just end up footing a lot of that bill.
So one of the reasons that Britain is cheaper for healthcare
Is because you steal drugs from us.
drugs.
You steal the drugs from us, yeah. But I mean, I don't think that's most of the reasons. So there's a variety of reasons. But.
Can I ask, do you think that it's plausible? One of the stories I heard was the incentives for doctors to push you towards getting care are quite high. So they will do, so for example, they'll always send you for an MRI scan if they think that
Yeah, I don't know that those problems are that much worse here than in other countries, but I think what one problem is that in other countries, there's more centralized analysis to say, like, you shouldn't be allowed to do this and you should be allowed to do that. Whereas in the US, there's this feeling like if any insurance company covers a condition, then everyone feels that they're entitled to have their insurance company cover that, and they get really pissed off or like scream at the government unless they do. And so I think the freedom that people have to get different choices in the United States is sort of poisonous, because once one person's doing something, something about the psychology of healthcare makes everyone demand that they should be able to get it. And so it's not really possible in that sort of a system to have freedom of choice, because anyone's choice becomes everyone's right. And so, yeah.
I know it's very difficult to find out what the price is of anything that you're going to get as well. I've just been spending lots of time in the doctors recently.
Yeah.
And so they keep sending me for stuff, and I go, okay, so I know that I've got a 90% coverage, but how much is that going to cost? And they're like, well, I don't know. And then it's like,
Yeah, because, well, that's because, no, but that's an outgrowth of the fact that we have too much insurance, because nobody cares about the prices because everything's paid for by the insurance rather than by you. If there was less insurance, there would be more demand for price transparency by individuals, I think. So that's one potential cost of too much insurance. So,
That was what a student presented on last
yeah,
year.
interesting, cool.
Why do you think there isn't more talk in the election about how like we basically have like, I mean like anyone can actually go in an emergency room and then they're required to be able to get medical care, and so like hospitals are really paying for a lot of uninsured people implicitly.
That's what Neil Mahoney's job market paper was about.
I don't know
Yeah,
who he is, but
he's a professor at the Booth School.
well I mean I don't hear politicians talking about that at all. Like we kind of
Well, they did during the 2008 cycle a little bit, about when they were debating about the mandate and so forth.
I mean, how is that a better justification for Obamacare?
It is a pretty good justification for Obamacare. But
The fact that a lot of people go to the emergency room because they don't have insurance.
But on the other hand, it's a problem with Obamacare, because it says that Obamacare is not necessary because everyone's getting implicit insurance from bankruptcy anyways.
Yeah, but I mean that causes hospitals a lot of like budget problems, so then they cut back, like UFC cut back on this trauma center because.
Yeah, but again, that's just moving money around. I mean, in the end, that gets paid for by other patients, which is sort of like being paid for by taxes. And so I actually think that's an argument that none of this matters, not an argument in favor of Obamacare.
Doesn't it partly drive up insurance costs because the hospital bills more insurance companies to cover the losses on life?
Yeah, but so does Obamacare, in the sense that you now have to cover all those people.
I think Becker had a blog post about that recently, or maybe not so recently, within the past year, and some people studied that and estimated the effect was really small, and so, yeah, look around the time of finals last year for us in first grade, because that's when I was reading his blog. Yeah.
Cool, guys.
Would you say that
Yeah.
inefficiency of like having a child center was socially